is David Sloane. I'm a Principal Agronomist with Aquaspy. Who's Aquaspy? We're a company that started in Australia with irrigation management, well, over 10 years ago. But at the beginning of last year, we transitioned the company to being a US-based company based out of Indianapolis. But as Nick said, I spend a lot of time over here. I've worked on the High Plains since about 2006, and I've been working with capacitance probes for about 11 years now. So just to preface what I want to talk about, the first point on that previous slide was profit-based irrigation management, and that's really who we are and what we're about. It's my title here is Strategic Irrigation Management using capacitance probes, although it was a bit long to put on there, is all about turning water into money, and that's our focus. And usually the byproduct of that is to save water as well, so it's a win-win. If we think about the value of water and have a look at this yield versus water applied curve, what we see is you'll get some yield without applying irrigation, dryland farming. As you put water on, generally you get an increase in yield up to a point, and then you'll start to tail off, and certain crops will tail off more quickly than others. So if I'm a cotton grower or growing citrus or something like that hates waterlogging, what I'll find is that you will get a decrease by putting too much water on. There is a real penalty for doing that, and that's obvious and people get that. How do you manage it? There is a right or a correct amount of water to put on, and that is also a moving target. It changes as we go through the growth cycle of the crop. Corn, on the other hand, and I've been giving this is a farmer-based talk, so I've been dealing with a lot of cotton and corn farmers, but really corn is forgiving, and it's harder to over-irrigate, and so therefore the tendency in this area has been to put more water on than is necessary. It's good insurance, I don't want to short the crop, but we're finding that a lot of people are operating up this end of the curve. And so while we find that there is a penalty for overwatering cotton, and people understand that, they get it, there is generally you can get the same yield for a large difference in irrigation applied with corn. And so people just want to get themselves up onto this flat part of the curve. They want to grow as much corn as they can, but they don't realize that they could probably pull it back a long way. And as I said, we're not in the business of saving water for the sake of saving water. We're in the business of turning that water into money. And so why am I going to put an extra inch of water on here when it's not giving me any more yield? In actual fact, what it's doing, I'm paying to pump it, it's washing my fertilizers through, and as I'll show you, it's also reducing your yield potential. I'd rather take that inch of water and put it on down here and get a greater economic return. And so part of what we're educating farmers is that you don't have to grow the highest yield to get the best return from your water, and it's all about converting water into money. So the value of every inch. Well, we just looked at that law of diminishing returns, and so the value of each inch of irrigation water decreases, with increasing volume. As I said, we just went through that. But if you think about how that crop uses that water, the crop water use changes throughout the season, and irrigation should mirror crop water use or crop demand. And the strategy that most people use in this part of the world is to turn the pivot on and sort of one day and turn it off 3 months later and let it run, and that's giving you a very flat application rate, when in actual fact the plant uses it in a much different way. So if we think about that, and then we also think about what happens inside that plant, that the value of that irrigation changes. So if I could take a little bit of, if I put an inch of water on early in the crop or late in a crop cycle and it's corn, I'm not going to get nearly as much value, much return for that water as if I could put more water on during that peak time of the season where it's very prone to stress. And so really the strategic irrigation management, the strategic part, is all about trying to understand what the plant needs and then deliver that. We want to provide the opportunity to catch rainfall. The strategy around here is that I want to fill the soil, I want to fill that bucket and keep it full so that when I get into that hot part of the season, I've got all that water there. The trouble is that if the bucket's full, you've got no room to catch anything more. You've got no room to catch rainfall. Any rain that falls, you get 2 inches of rain, it's actually probably going to push you further off that curve to the right than helping you, which is why that economic optimum is a little bit more to the left side of that curve I put up there before. We want to evaluate every irrigation. So turning it on day one and turning it off 3 months later, maybe you'll start and stop a little bit in between, is not what I'm advocating. I'm advocating a higher level of management here. And if we've got the appropriate tools, that becomes very easy. And as I mentioned before, water is money. So let's maximise the conversion rate. It's our most precious resource. Let's make more out of it. And it's not that hard to do. So if we're putting water on a plant, what is it that we're trying to do? We're trying to build a plant. A plant is a whole bunch of cells. Think of cells like bricks in a wall. And so if I want to build a bigger wall, I can have more bricks, or I could have bigger bricks, or I could have more bigger bricks. And if we think about those processes in a plant as photosynthesis or cell expansion, photosynthesis, cell production, cell expansion, if along the bottom here we've got soil moisture content where the soil is full, we're at a refill point and wilting point, so the soil is drying off, we can actually, by adjusting the soil moisture content, we can adjust what goes on in the plant. And I guess the plant will respond to what is the soil moisture content, but if you know that the plant needs different things at different crop stages, then you can actually plan for that, manipulate the soil moisture and drive that plant to do what you want it to do. And so if I'm growing lawn and I want that lawn to be nice and green, but I don't want to mow it a lot, what I can do is I can hold that moisture content here where photosynthesis is maximised but cell expansion isn't. So I can have a really beautiful lush lawn without it being really rank and not have to mow it very often. Whereas if I want to grow a lettuce crop or silage corn and I want to get all that leaf, I want to get it real quick, I can move that soil moisture content up to here, which is why lettuces are grown hydroponically, by the way, so that water is non-limiting and you get all that cell expansion. Or if they're in the field, they irrigate 4 times a day, simply to keep that moisture content at a point where that is growing really quickly. And so we can manipulate that and give ourselves a target to aim for. And that target, here we've got a blue zone which is too wet, we're not getting any benefit from that. A green zone which is where I want to keep the soil moisture, and a red zone which is too dry. And we can make this green zone as narrow or as wide as our irrigation system will allow, and then we can move it up or down depending on what we're trying to do with the crop. If I'm trying to grow high quality wine grapes, I actually want to use stress as a weapon and cut down on a lot of vegetative growth at certain times, but at other times I want to actually move my soil moisture right up here to grow large berries. So it's strategic irrigation management is all about trying to define a strategy and keep it there. So let's have a look at what we do, soil moisture monitoring. We actually have the ability to listen to the crop. How so? Well, we put a probe in the ground, we measure soil moisture, and in this example here we've irrigated, soil moisture goes up, then we're using soil moisture in a characteristic fashion until the soil dries out, we irrigate again, soil moisture goes up, and we're seeing it drying out. Well, the sensors that we use are connected to a logger that takes readings every 3 minutes, but the average 5 readings, you get readings every 15 minutes throughout the day. And you get a continuous data stream coming in, and from that you can actually see the plant drinking. So we can watch the plant using moisture during the day, not overnight, during the day, not overnight, and that's the heartbeat of the crop. The crop, it's talking to me now, telling me how fast it's growing. And this crop happens to be cotton in a row watered situation where it gets too much water, it gets a lot of water up here and the steps are small. Then the steps get large because that crop is real happy. Then they get small again because it's running out of moisture. And so the crop is defining the moisture condition that it's happiest in. And for most people around here, it's all centre pivot irrigation, maybe some drip, but you're not going to get a lot of this waterlogging. What you're going to see is this running out of moisture, and that's still very critical. The plant can tell you when it's getting thirsty, and it's really the key to understanding what's going on. If you think back about those processes inside that plant, once we get to a point down here, we are starting to really slow down growth, and there is a target there that we can aim for. So we don't want to be too wet, we want to be in this green zone, we don't want to be in that red zone, and that will shift as we grow the crop. Just to introduce the technology, what we have is a capacitance probe. looks like this. I've got a 40-inch probe here. There is a sensor on here every 4 inches down this probe. So we've got the electronics inside here, and you might ask, how does capacitance work? Well, we're generating a little electromagnetic field at each sensor, which goes out through the plastic into the soil, and it measures the moisture of where that field passes through. And so by I guess the speed of the frequency that it oscillates at, don't need to worry about the technical jargon other than it is proven methodology. It's been around for a long time, and we're using that with a probe with an array of sensors, one every 4 inches, as in this picture here. And we have different probe lengths, but usually a 40-inch probe like this one is what we would use. It's continuous data, and as a business, what we're doing is not selling equipment, we're selling a service. So we'll actually do all the installation, hook up telemetry, cellular telemetry, make it all work and deliver data to the desktop. But I'm not here to sell you on it. Just to explain a little bit about how you get it in the ground, we auger a hole, we mix up a mud slurry, and then we bed the probe into that slurry to make sure we get a very good tight fit. So let's get on to strategic irrigation management. And what is it? Well, really, as I mentioned before, it's matching irrigation with plant water requirements. Key point, very fundamental. So we're not just doing a set irrigation strategy, we're trying to vary it. It's about setting up the plant for success. This is another key point. The plant is alive, it will respond to how you treat it, and I'll show you an example of that. If you give it too much water, it won't tend to get its roots down deep. If you hold off a little bit, not stress it, but just hold off a little bit, it will actually explore the soil and get a deeper root system. We want to, because we can see what's going on under the soil, we can actually now measure the root system and manipulate that root system. We can manage irrigation and drainage. We can see where the water goes, and we can see if we're getting it deep enough. We can see if we're getting it too deep. If we're putting fertilizer on with the water, we can make sure we use that wisely as well. And we want to manage production risk. It's a key point in terms of staying on track season after season after season. And this is also where people can make a lot of money by not having that 20 bushel swing up or down. They can make sure they can lock in what or grow, get the result they're aiming for. And so we use irrigation templates to control that process. So what's an irrigation template? Well, matching irrigation with plant needs, if we look at this corn water use curve, well really it's actually, this graph is percent yield reduction versus growth stage. And with corn, we see that there is a time of the year there where if we get moisture stress during flowering, we can actually have a greater than 40% yield reduction. Don't need that. We want to avoid anything to do with reducing our yield potential. So, okay, if we want lots of moisture, we want, well, I guess first up, look at the constraint of the system, and the system might mean, or might be, that the corn around here might use 0.35, 0.4 inches per day. I could probably only supply an inch every 4 days, or 0.25 inches per day. There's going to be a time where that corn crop I cannot meet its demand using the irrigation system, using the sprinkler. So it has to, at this very critical time, it needs to use or draw on that soil moisture to grow the crop. So the logical answer to that is fill it up when you can. So you're coming into the, before you get to that critical time of the season, we want to put lots of water on, fill that soil, fill that bucket. A season like last year, 2010, lots of rainfall, lots of snow melt, the bucket was already full. People were out there irrigating. What happened? Well, the plant didn't need to get its roots down, and so by putting too much water on here, or over-irrigation early, can reduce root growth. And not only is it, are you wasting water, wasting pumping costs, you're flushing fertilizer, but you're damaging your yield potential by not having a big enough engine. The roots aren't deep enough to carry you through this time. And so it's a win-win. You can pull back on water, probably save some fertilizer, and get a better yield potential. So the tendency around here is that people over-irrigate at the beginning of the season, they under-irrigate in the middle, and then at the end of the season tend to over-irrigate because it's cheap insurance. Energy at the moment is cheap. People think, well, I don't want to lose that 10, 20 bushels, I'm going to irrigate, and if they're continuing with that set irrigation practice, the plant is now using less than what they're putting on, and they'll tend to wet that soil up when you don't need to. Why finish a car race with a full tank of gas? You can actually drain it to sort of finish on an empty tank of gas. So an irrigation template, if I'm thinking about this, I want to try and hold off over irrigating early. I want to fill that bucket moving into the critical time. During that pollination phase, I'm going to be going flat out. No one's going to stop me. But at the end here, I want to make sure that I only put enough water on, or the exact amount that I need. What does that look like? Here I've got that similar soil moisture curve. This now goes over a 4-month period, so I'm looking at the whole crop. And what I just mentioned there was I want to let the soil dry out a little bit, and then I want to fill it up. Drying out means that I can catch that rainfall. I'm not talking about drying the soil completely. I'm just saying let the plant establish itself. Don't mother it, because otherwise it might not be, well, you might be shorting yourself when you really need to need those roots during this time of the season. Then you want to wet it back up coming into to that critical phase. So you do go into there with a full bucket, that full tank of gas. And then at the end here, run to the finish. And our experience is that you can generally save a good 2 or 3 inches. It depends on who you are and where you're irrigating, but you could probably pick up 2 to 3 inches at the start and another inch or 2 on the back end, and that's water in the aquifer. And that also is not shorting people on yield. It's just moving down that yield curve, that yield-water relationship on that flat part of the curve. And what a lot of farmers have also told me is that they've got 20 circles out there, some on light water, some on heavy water, and I mean, it's sort of the penny drops, because they're saying, well, yeah, my heavy water it runs for the same number of hours as my light water circle, and it's getting a lot more water, and I'm not getting a big yield difference. In fact, in some years, that heavy water circle actually gives me a lower yield. So what you're saying, actually, I can see that in the field. And so they can pull back. They know that they're putting on too much. So, but how do you know what's just the right amount? Well, you actually watch what's going on. As far as templates go, that was for corn. How to grow corn, how to grow cotton is going to be entirely different. And it's different here on the high plains as it is in Australia, because we have a different season. But generally with cotton around here, the template is to let it establish, then don't fill it back up, or else it'll go really rank on you. And you don't want a really tall plant. You want to get it fruiting up as quickly as possible. But you do look after it during the peak bloom phase, and then you try and put a bit of a squeeze on it leading into bowl filling, and try and finish it off so that you actually can mature that fruit. And so it's just a strategy. This is what I think my irrigation should look like, and if the weather tries to throw me off that path, I can get back on it because I can see what's going on. So there's a strategy that we've put in place because we know what the plant needs at different times. So how do we put the right amount on at the right time? What we're trying to do is, because we can see this root zone, we can now try and increase it. We can hold off just a little bit. We know how much. We can actually look at the results of holding off by 2 more days. You know, turn off that sprinkler, let it go, let the plant develop a little bit to develop that active root zone. We can reduce drainage and leaching, because you can see the effect of that irrigation. Well, I've just put on 1 1/4 inches and it ran through. Well, maybe I'm going to let the soil dry a little bit more, or I'm going to just back off. I'll speed up the pivot, not put as much on, so that it doesn't drain through. Managing fertigation, I'll show you an example of that. Managing rainfall. What was the value? I just got 2 inches of rain, but the value of that rain will depend on how dry the soil is. If it's drier, it'll take it in. If it's wetter, it won't. And you want to see, just like a gas gauge in your truck, someone went and filled up, but they didn't tell you how much they put in. Well, you'll see whether they've filled it or they didn't. And we can really manage rainfall a lot better and see the value of that and know whether you can shut down or you've got to keep running. As I mentioned, we should be able to save some early and late irrigation, and we want to work within the season to stay on track. So it's all about evaluating each of those irrigations and just putting the right amount on at the right time. So if I show you an example of manipulating the root zone, what I've got here is a graph that most of you probably won't be able to see up the back there, but there's a series of coloured lines here, and each of those lines is actually a sensor on this probe. And we call this a separate layer graph. And so we've got, at the top here, there's a 4-inch sensor, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, and so on, down through the soil. If I just pull out 3 of those sensors at the first foot, 12 inches, 24, 36 inches, and we have a look at what the roots are doing, what I'm looking for is that characteristic stepping. And so along here, it's pretty flat, and then it starts to step down. And along here, it's very flat, little bit of movement, but it doesn't really start to step down until we get to this point of the season. So we can follow that through, and in this cotton crop down at Lockney, we can see that the roots were establishing in that top foot, getting into the second foot, just starting to touch the third foot when all that rain came on around the 4th of July weekend. And so we can see the soil wet up. And we can also see that that plant was just getting going here, but then it didn't need to do anything. That's that response from the plant. If I don't need to put my roots down, then I won't. And then as the weather dried out, warmed up, that plant got going again, and it's pulling that moisture out of 12, 24, 36, and you can actually see those roots going down, and you can see them active. If I'm trying to manage irrigation and drainage, I've got all these lines on that graph again, and we've got corn grown at Lockney and corn grown at Bovina. Same crop, two different regions, different soil moisture contents. Where the soil was wet, what I can see each time we irrigate through here, or it might have been some rainfall as well, but there was definitely irrigations in there. Down low, there is no stepping, there is no root activity, and yet we get this blip. And that blip is because water has gone on that soil and it can't hold it. The soil's already full, just like a sponge. If I filled up a sponge and then I put more water on, it's going to run through. Same with the soil. And I've got the soil, that water runs straight down past all these sensors, and as it does, they blip up and then back to where they were as that wave of water passes through. So what I'm looking at here is a wave of water passing through every single time that irrigation comes on or rainfall. So that's bad, especially if it's irrigation, because you're pumping and it's going straight through, so you're wasting your money and you're wasting your fertilizer. And if it's cotton, you're actually hurting, or corn as well, you're hurting the setup of that crop, but cotton, you might even be waterlogging it. So we don't want to see that. On the other hand, I do want to fill that bucket. I want to fill the soil because that's what I want to see going into the critical period. And so on down here at Bovina, what we see is, it might be hard to see, at the bottom of this graph here, there is no blip when the water comes on. And I can start to see these filling up each time water comes on. And so if I can see that subsoil wetting up, or if I look at it as the other view, the summed graph with all those lines added together, what I see there is that over on this side we're spending some time above the blue line and it's very sharp drainage, and here we're getting real wet. But on this other